Welcome back, Sule. If you need a palate cleanser from the distressing events of Rhythm of War, then this video is not for you. In our fourth video on the Stormlight Archive epigraph letters, we will be diving into Harmony's second letter to Hoid. If you don't know what the epigraph letters are, then you should head back to the start of this series where we talk about Hoid's letter to his old friend Frost from the Way of Kings. Spoiler warning for the end of Rhythm of War, so if you haven't finished the book yet, do that first. We also have minor and or major spoilers for Mistborn Era 1, Mistborn Era 2, the rest of the Stormlight Archive, Elantris, Warbreaker, Six of the Dust, Shadows for Silence, and the Force of Hell. Wait, you know what? Screw this. Spoiler warning for every single Brandon Sanderson book ever written. Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians, Steelheart, Wheel of Time, the children's book. I can't take it anymore. For those of you still with us, we have our longest letter yet, so let's get started.
Dear Wanderer, I did receive your latest communication. Please forgive formality on my part, as we have not met in person. I feel new to this role, despite my years holding it. You will admit to my relative youth, I think.
Relatively young for a god can mean almost anything, but in our Cosmere timeline video, here, we have theorized that the events of the Stormlight Archive take place sometime during the events of Mistborn Era 2. This detail from Harmony sounds very similar to the way he speaks to Waxilium in Shadows of Self, so let's assume there isn't a large time jump between the two stories. I find it interesting that Harmony states he hasn't met Hoid in person. We will go over Hoid's Mistborn series appearances in a moment, but he has had ample time to introduce himself to the new vessel. Maybe Hoid doesn't trust him, considering he wields two shards of opposing goals. After all, Hoid has been desperate enough to reach out to shards who genuinely despise him. Harmony also makes a reference to his relative youth as a vessel, and he confirms that this letter was written years after the Cassandra. I always appreciate Sazed's forthcomingness and self-awareness.
I have been fascinated to discover how much you've accomplished on Scadrial without me noticing your presence. How is it that you hide from Shards so well?
In our video about the first letter, we mentioned the bead of Lerasium that Hoid stole in Mistborn's secret history. This was done under the nose of both Ruin and Preservation, showing just how sneaky Hoid can be. Hoid has formed a relationship as a coachman to Wax and Wayne during Era 2, and outside of driving them around, we also see Hoid give Wax an unkeyed copper mine, allowing him to tap it. Wax is able to see an old memory of a family of southern Scadrians freezing to death as they are approached by the owner of the memory, Kelsier. This honestly doesn't have a large impact on the story, and it more so acted as a grand reveal of Kelsier surviving. If Harmony is impressed by the accomplishments of Hoid, there must have been way more that he's done on Scadrial that we don't know of.
I have reached out to the others as you have requested, and have received a variety of responses. Much as you indicate, there is a division among the other shards I would not have anticipated.
Here, we find out that Hoid is using Harmony to communicate to the other shards from his position of divinity. In the Oathbringer letter, we see Endowment and Autonomy's avatar disregard Hoid for his lack of being a shard, noting that he has had his chance. Since we have only seen the shards disagree with Hoid, I find it interesting that Harmony mentions this as a divided issue. This must mean that there were shards that either wouldn't respond to Hoid, or Hoid couldn't get a hold of. Harmony makes it clear that these shards must agree with Hoid's position at least to some degree. Regardless, this is an on-brand sneaky move from Hoid, so let's see how well it works.
Endowment at least responded to my overtures, though I have not been able to locate Invention again following our initial contact. Whimsy was not terribly useful, and Mercy worries me. I do think that Valor is reasonable, and suggest you approach her again. It's been too long in her estimation since your last conversation.
Clearly, Harmony's letter didn't change Endowment's stance on race. We get 4 interesting shard name drops here: Invention, Whimsy, Mercy, and Valor. None of these shards have made an appearance in Brandon's work up to this point, but I'm sure we will see them, or at least their influence in the future. It appears that Hoid and Valor are at least amiable. It's possible that she gave him the "come and speak to me in person, I'm more important than an email" speech that Harmony gave him in the previous letter. Maybe Hoid will contact her now, but the other two clearly aren't going to be much help. As far as Mercy goes, you already know where we stand on that.
The deaths of both Devotion and Dominion trouble me greatly. I had not realized this immense power we held was something that could be broken in such a way. On my world, the power always gathered and sought a new vessel.
Dominion and Devotion are truly a unique case. The power of the Aeons on Cell come directly from tapping into the investiture of the two splintered shards in the cognitive realm? Yes, their raw investiture has flooded Shadesmar on Cell and is known as the Substance Door. This makes it extremely dangerous to world hop to the planet unless you like being cooked alive, and it doesn't seem that those shards will be taking on new vessels anytime soon. Sazed, on the other hand, found the powers of both ruin and preservation laying with the corpses of their dead vessels, and was able to take both of them at once. This was far different than what happened with the Cellish shards.
That said, the most worrying thing I discovered in this was the wound upon the spiritual realm, where ambition, mercy, and odium clashed, and ambition was destroyed. The effects on the planet Thrity have been disturbing.
We referenced this in our last video, but this is a huge revelation. We knew from Arcanum Unbounded that Odium fought ambition over many systems, and this is where we find out that mercy was involved too. If mercy was trying to help ambition, then that could explain why ambition was targeted by Odium in the first place. To be fair, Harmony doesn't mention mercy assisting ambition, so this is a bit speculative. But I have to believe that the Shard of Mercy wasn't there helping Odium make ambition spaghetti. Harmony also gives us more insight on what specifically happened to Threnody, a wound upon the spiritual realm. As I mentioned in the last video, many have theorized that this caused the evil on Threnody's mainland, and it is possible that this is the reason the Threnodites become shades when they die. Maybe the path through the spiritual realm to the great beyond is broken or corrupted, trapping souls as twisted, broken creatures that will haunt the Cosmere forever.
Other shards I cannot identify and are hidden to me. I fear that their influence encroaches upon my world, yet I am locked into a strange inability because of the opposed powers I hold.
This may be referencing the shard Autonomy in her attempt to establish her avatar Trell on Scadrial in the Lost Metal. There, we saw Harmony unable to be decisive, heavily relying on his servants. That would also mean that this letter was written before that book. But again, that's just a theory. Again, he does mention multiple shards, so he is likely referring to the one shard that is still unnamed and unconfirmed. I personally hope that we get this name drop in the upcoming secret project, Isles of the Emberdark.
I have begun searching for a pathway out of this conundrum by seeking the ideal person to act on my behalf. Someone who embodies both preservation and ruin. A sword, you might say, who can both protect and kill.
Ah yes, the not-so-subtle hint at Waxilium Ladrian, Harmony's sword. This is an interesting point of note, as Harmony still says he is seeking this person, and by the end of the Lost Metal, we know that Wax does become Harmony's sword, as well as a full Mistborn. This would likely put this letter before the Lost Metal at the very least, but we don't know when exactly this letter was written in the events of the Stormlight Archive. Could we see Waxilium Ladrian shooting shard killer rounds into Skybreakers in the future? Roshar really could use a technologically superior hero right about now.
But this does not get to the core of your letter. I have encouraged those who would speak to me to heed your warnings, but all seem content to ignore Odium for the time being. In their opinion, he is no threat, as long as he remains confined in the Rosharan system.
The classic shard approach of out of sight, out of mind. I'm sure this won't bite them in the chaw, but for now, it still doesn't help Hoid. This does make me wonder what Harmony meant earlier when he said that there was division amongst the shards. I thought that that meant that there was a group of shards that agreed with Hoid, but now I'm thinking he was referring to a general division between the shards. We know that some of the shards have broken the pact made at the Shattering, likely causing a rift between them. Also, both Odium and Autonomy are meddling a lot with the other shards. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a large faction of vessels who want to stay out of this. Who knew being a god could be so tense?
I do not share their attitude. If you can, as you suppose, maintain Odium's prison for now, it would give us necessary time to plan. This is a threat beyond the capacity of one shard to face.
Man, it's good to see Harmony allying himself with Hoid here. He also references a threat beyond just one shard to face. This is likely referencing cultivation, but we've seen her seemingly support Terra of Odium. I think that it is likely that Harmony is worried that if Odium escapes, he is next on the chopping block. Odium already seems to feel threatened by the shards working together, so I can only imagine that he would feel threatened by a vessel holding two shards. I also want to note that Hoid supposes he can maintain Odium's prison, at least for a time. This would would be in reference to the contract and Hoid's involvement in it, but that only gives them 10 days to plan, assuming they win the contest. Will we see Harmony cameo in Wind and Truth?
Unfortunately, as proven by my own situation, the combination of shards is not always a path to greater power. We must assume that Odium has realized this and is seeking a singular, terrible goal: the destruction and somehow splintering or otherwise making impotent of all shards other than him.
This is it. This is Odium's goal: to be the only shard. Harmony admits that holding 2 shards did not make him more powerful. If anything, it made him more indecisive and passive. The logic holds that the best way to become the only shard would be to eliminate all of the competition. This also explains why he would target shards that have teamed up first. They likely pose the biggest threat, especially the longer that they are together. I mean, just look at what Cultivation and Honor were able to do on Roshar by trapping Odium for over 4 millennia.
To combine powers would change and distort who Odium is. So instead of absorbing others, he destroys them. Since we are all essentially infinite, he needs no more power. Destroying and splintering the other shards would leave Odium as the sole god, unchanged and uncorrupted by other influences.
Harmony raises a great point here, and something he has first-hand experience with. Shards already changed the vessel, and we see Harmony with a completely different intent than that of either preservation or ruin. If Odium were to take on another shard, he would no longer be Odium, and his motivations would likely change. Since Odium is the god of hatred, he is likely not fond of change and would be more than happy to let everyone die. This will be interesting to see how Taravangian's desire to save everyone in a utilitarian manner combines with Odium's hatred.
You say that the power itself must be treated as separate in our minds from the vessel who controls it. I find this difficult to do on an intrinsic level, as although I am neither ruin nor preservation, they make up me. Regardless, I will try to do as you suggest. However, you seem more afraid of the vessel. I warn you that this is a flaw in your understanding.
Hoid is worried about Raze because of his loathsome and crafty nature, something Hoid knows from their history pre-shattering. Unfortunately, Hoid doesn't know that Raze is dead. I personally think that Harmony is wrong here, because the vessel absolutely matters, at least early on in their shardness. This point of treating the shard and the vessel separately may be critical to defeating Odium now that he is held by the far craftier Taravangian.
You have not felt what I have. You have not known what I have. You have rejected that chance, and wisely, I think.
Man, every shard really likes to point out Hoid's rejection of becoming one of them. I do wonder what Harmony means by Hoid making a wise decision. Is it because he regrets holding the shard, or is it because he thinks Hoid wouldn't be a good choice to hold a shard? We still wonder what Hoid's intentions for leaving the power behind were. Since we know Hoid is practically immortal, it wasn't so that he could live a normal life. Maybe all of the vessels regret their decision now, and Hoid was right all along. That would explain their constant irritation with him.
However, though you think not as immortal, you are their kin. The power of Odium's shard is more dangerous than the mind behind it, particularly since any investiture seems to gain a will of its own when not controlled.
Harmony clearly feels as though Raze has been completely overthrown by the shard he holds. Since Raze was one of the original vessels, the thousands of years as Odium would definitely have been long enough for the intentions of the vessel to no longer matter. With Taravangian only being 10 shard days old by the time of the Contest of Champions, I think it is unlikely we see too much of a change from his previous intentions. We also don't know what Cultivation's meddling with his intelligence will do to him as he holds the shard. My main point is that I think Hoid is correct to fear the vessel. He's just too busy fearing the wrong one, which is far more worrying.
My instincts say that the power of Odium is not being controlled well. The vessel will be adapted to the power's will, and after this long, if Odium is still seeking to destroy, then it's because of the power. Of course, I admit this is a small quibble, a difference of semantics more than anything.
Harmony is harping on the same points he was making to Hoid earlier. There isn't much to add, but I will point out my love for Sazed. It is very much like him to be distracted from the main picture to argue very minor details. Honestly, I can relate.
In truth, it would be a combination of a vessel's craftiness and the power's intent that we should fear most. Regardless, please make yourself known to me when you travel my lands. It's distressing that you think you need to move in the shadows.
And that settles it. Taravangian is by far the most powerful and dangerous thing in the Cosmere right now, and we should all be terrified of him. If Raze was considered crafty, and he was outmaneuvered by an old Taravangian with variable intelligence and a manic diagram, then we can only assume the worst for our heroes. This is not a battle they are likely to win in the short term, and it's possible that they won't be able to stop Odium until he turns his attention away from Roshar. If that is the case, then we may have to see how the characters we love can pick up the pieces after the Contest of Champions. Final note, Sazed is far nicer to Hoid than he should be. Like I said at the beginning, this was no palate cleanser for Rhythm of War. This letter truly foreshadows how terrifying Odium is. Brandon has confirmed that we will be getting another epigraph letter in Wind and Truth. And honestly, I don't know who that author could be, but you can bet that we will make a video on that too. Leave your thoughts on the next author in the comments below. Colo?